Good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Amy Dacey. I'm the Executive Director of the Sine Institute of Policy and Politics here at American University. On behalf of our co-sponsors for the event this evening, the School of Public Affairs, the School of International Service, and the Transatlantic Policy Center, I want to welcome you to this evening's program. Ambassador Daniel Mulhall looks back. Irish Ambassador to the U.S. reflects on 5 years in D.C. The ambassador is also the author of Ulysses, a new book that we will make sure that you get the information for. I'm enjoying reading it. But the honor of introducing the ambassador goes tonight, this evening, to one of our AU students, Ria Duda, who is the leader of an Ask an Ambassador group here at American University. So as we begin the program, I'd like to hand it over to Ria as she introduces our special guest this evening. Ria?
Thank you for that introduction. Good morning. My name is Ria Dutta, and I'm the president of Ask a Diplomat. Our club is a club on campus that hosts ambassadors twice a month in events just like this, where we talk about different topics relevant to the time and host webinars with ambassadors. I'm very happy to be at this event today and welcome Ambassador Daniel Mulhall. Ambassador Daniel Mulhall took up his duty as Ireland's 18th ambassador to the United States in August 2017. He was born and brought up in Waterford and undertook his undergraduate and postgraduate studies at University College Cork, where he specialized in modern Irish history. Before coming to Washington, he served as Ireland's ambassador in London from 2013 to 2017. During his time in Britain, he was a regular speaker on political, literary, and historical topics in universities all over the country, including at Oxford, Cambridge, Edinburgh, Glasgow, Manchester, and the London School of Economics. Ambassador Mulhall maintains a key interest in Irish history and literature. He is the author of A New Day Dawning, A Portrait of Ireland in 1900, and co-editor of The Shaping of Modern Ireland, a Centenary assessment, and has made numerous contributions to books, newspapers, and journals published in Ireland, Australia, New Zealand, Germany, and Britain. I would like to welcome the ambassador to American University and thank you so much for his time today. Thank you.
Thank you very much to the American University, to the staff and students of that wonderful university, which I've been to quite a few times, and thank you for inviting me here this evening and for asking me to reflect on my almost 5 years now as ambassador to the United States. In a way, I don't like looking back like this because it kind of reminds me that my assignment here is rapidly coming to a close, although I still have more than 3 months to go. So I'm planning to be active in this job until the very last day of my assignment in the middle of August of this year. But I suppose it does make sense when you're coming to the end of an assignment like this to look back and to think about what's gone on over the last 5 years and where things stand now in the realm in which I operate, the diplomatic relationship between Ireland and the United States. I'll start by saying that we have a unique set of ties here in the United States. Those ties are a combination of the historical and sentimental, and on the one hand, and on the other hand, practical and contemporary ties. And the combination of the two, I think, makes this a unique relationship between our two countries. And that's what I want to talk about this evening. That's what I want to answer your questions on when I finish my opening remarks. When I talk about the historical and traditional sentimental relationship between Ireland and the United States, what do I mean? Well, that relationship was forged on the backs of literally millions of Irish people who came to this country, mainly in the 19th century, but into the 20th century as well. And those people and their descendants were a fundamental part of what makes America what it is today. So they were a very important element in the fabric of modern America. So those Irish who came in the 19th century, they helped to build your railroads, to dig America's canals, to build your skyscrapers, to teach in your schools, to serve in your hospitals, to serve in your military, where the Irish have a very distinguished record, a very high percentage of all the Congressional Medals of Honor given to people who are from outside of the United States were awarded to people born in Ireland. So there is a very strong contribution to America across the board in really all walks of American life. And of course, in more recent decades, the Irish have come into their own in different sectors of your economy and society, not least, of course, in the political sphere, where going back to John F. Kennedy in the early 60s, great Irish-American president, very strong Irish heritage, and then so many other prominent American politicians over the last 60 years. I mentioned a few: Ted Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, Tip O'Neill, Ronald Reagan, Bill Clinton. I could go on and on and on, but you get the idea. So that contribution is really very strong. And I think that means that the Irish are a fundamental part, one of the building blocks of today's America. And that's something that obviously makes Irish people very proud, especially when we, today we have in the White House another Irish American who was deeply proud of his Irish heritage, and President Joe Biden. So that contribution means that the historical dimension to our relationship is very strong. And I have to say that apart from the individual stories, the unheralded individual stories that have been told over the last 150, 200 years by millions of Irish people coming here and their descendants in this country, there is also a collective story, which is the persistence and perseverance of a strong Irish-American identity, which flourishes to this day. And so that is the traditional anchor of the relationship between Ireland and the United States. Alongside that, there's a more contemporary dimension to our relationships. And by this, I mean economic ties, scientific, educational, and people-to-people ties, because in 2019, the last normal year on our calendar, more than 2 million Americans visited Ireland. And quite a large number of Irish people visited this country too. So there's a lot of people going back and forth between our two countries in a normal year. And we hope this year will be another normal year, and we will see similar numbers of Americans visiting Ireland, where they will be very welcome, because we have a special welcome in our hearts and in our cities and towns and countryside for Americans who travel to visit us in Ireland. So let me just talk a little bit about that economic and educational relationship. It really started in the 1950s, when the then Irish government decided that our policies, our national policies that had been followed in the 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s were simply not producing the right outcomes for Ireland. They recognized that we hadn't been able to inject any dynamism into our economy. Our economy was kind of meandering along, not making any great headway. We were well behind all of the other European countries at that time. The countries of Western Europe were all well ahead of Ireland in their economic development. And also in the 50s, we had very high levels of emigration, not so much to the United States, but going primarily to our nearest neighbor in Great Britain. So the policy changed, and our government decided to open up our economy and to welcome and encourage foreign direct investment in Ireland. And that foreign direct investment, which has come primarily, but not exclusively, from the United States, has really been a game changer for Ireland over the last 60 years. Because today, we have about 850 US companies operating in Ireland, where between them, they employ 80,000 people, about 7% of our country's workforce. Those companies are also responsible for a large percentage of Ireland's exports, because those companies are largely in Ireland not to serve the Irish market of 5 million consumers, but to serve the European market, the single European market, which has a total of 450 million consumers and is the largest single market in the world. A second factor that has driven our relationship is the fact that Ireland joined the European Union in 1973. And next year will be the 50th anniversary of our EU membership. And that membership of the EU has been a game changer for Ireland. It's helped to transform our economy from the weakest economy in Western Europe in the 1960s and 50s to one of the strongest today. And of course, it's our membership of the European Union, our access to the European single market that makes Ireland attractive to United States companies looking for a base within the European Union from which they can service the markets of the EU. This economic connection is by no means a one-way street, because it's characterized by strong flows of trade and investment in both directions. So let me give you the figures. There are about 800 Irish companies today investing in America. And between them, those companies employ about 150,000 Americans. So a significant impact on the American job market coming from a country as small as Ireland with 5 million people. It's a remarkable statistic, I believe, that Ireland is in the top 10 of foreign investors in the United States. And those companies are to be found in every part of these 50 United States. And they make a real impact. And by the way, the number of Irish companies active here has grown dramatically over the last 10 years. As I said, we have 800 or so companies today. 10 years ago, the figure would have been more like 200 or 300. So we're getting quite a number of companies coming in. About 60 companies enter the US market every year. Other Irish companies grow their footprint here, develop their presence in this country. And they make a real impact. And so the investment flows in both directions. And Irish companies benefit from being able to operate in the US market, and US companies benefit from being able to operate in Ireland within the European single market. And then, as I mentioned, you have tourism with 2 million Americans visiting Ireland in a normal year, and many Irish people coming here as well. And then you have the trade picture, where we have $150 billion in two-way trade between Ireland and the United States in goods and services. And that makes a real impact on jobs and prosperity in both of our countries. So we are a meaningful economic partner for the United States. The amount of trade and investment between our two countries is significant, even in global terms, not to mention coming from a country with 5 million people. So that's the picture. And to mention that, I mentioned educational links. We have very significant educational links. In normal years, again, about 12,000 American students study abroad, follow study abroad programs in Ireland. All of our universities have multiple connections with American universities. On a per capita basis, Ireland is the most popular destination for study abroad Americans doing study abroad programs anywhere in the world. And then we have huge number of research collaborations between our universities and scientific institutions and their American counterparts. So it's a very rich picture, which I think helps to sustain the relationship. You have on the one hand, the traditional sentimental connections. On the other hand, you have the pragmatic contemporary ones. But there are other things as well that we need to think about. And the first is that we share a set of values between Ireland and the United States. And Ireland is now the only English-speaking country in the European Union after the departure of the United Kingdom last year. And therefore, I think we have a capacity to play a bigger role in transatlantic relations. And that's come to light, that's come into focus in a big way during the crisis in Ukraine, when Ireland has stepped forward and has taken a forthright stance in pushing back against the Russian aggression against the people of Ukraine. And we've done everything in our power as members of the UN Security Council, alongside the United States. We've spoken in very sharp terms to expose the brutality of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. We have now supported 5 packages of sanctions, European Union sanctions against Russia, and a 6th package is in preparation, and we're fully supportive of that too. So we have done everything we can. We've also supported the European Union's assistance package. The EU has supplied Ukraine with a large package of military support, more than $1 billion coming from the European Union, besides, of course, the bilateral support that member states have been able to offer. And finally, we in Ireland have taken in already 30,000 Ukrainians. And by the way, that figure may sound modest in American terms, but if you equate that to the United States, given your population on a per capita basis, that would be getting on for 2 million people arriving in the United States in the space of 8 weeks. You can tell from that what a big challenge it is for us to accommodate that number of people who suddenly arrived on our doorsteps from a part of Europe that is as far away as you can go from Ireland. But we are determined to play our part in supporting the people of Ukraine when they need shelter. Our doors have been open to them, our hearts have been open to them, and we have committed ourselves to giving shelter to as many Ukrainians as need to come to our shores seeking shelter from the violence inflicted upon them on account of the Russian invasion. So I think the situation, the crisis in Ukraine has served to underline the values that bind the United States and the European Union, including Ireland. And we have learned a lesson in the last few months as to the importance of the democratic values that we possess and we share with you in the United States. Our belief in the rule of law, our opposition to the kind of brutality unleashed on Ukraine by Russia this past few months. We will continue to seek to hold Russia to account for its appalling activities in Ukraine. And we've supported Russia being referred to the International Criminal Court for investigations of war crimes, to gather evidence of war crimes committed, we believe, by the Russian forces against innocent civilians in Ukraine. Finally, before I hand over to some questions, I want to talk a little bit about Northern Ireland, because I know that that's an issue that's of considerable interest to many, many Americans, not just Irish Americans, but in particular Irish Americans who have traditionally taken a huge interest in the affairs of Ireland, including in trying to resolve the conflict in Northern Ireland and to facilitate a peaceful settlement to that particular set of issues that have affected Northern Ireland now for almost 50 years, or for more than 50 years. So here's the story. Irish Americans down the generations, back to the 19th century, were always very supportive of the cause of Irish independence. When we became independent 100 years ago, in my view, we would never have succeeded in gaining our independence had it not been for the support given to Ireland by Irish Americans, by Irish people in America and their descendants, who down the generations were very supportive, and they lobbied the US administration and Congress to ensure that American support for Ireland was made obvious by politicians, congressmen, and members of the administration in this country. And that helped us to achieve our independence 100 years ago. Turn the clock forward to the 1970s and 80s, when Northern Ireland was racked by conflicts. Again, Irish Americans weighed in the form of people like Tip O'Neill and Ted Kennedy and people like that, and a whole generation of congressmen were very effective in lobbying the US administration to weigh in and to argue the cause of peace in Ireland. And eventually in 1998, Senator George Mitchell was sent to Ireland by President Clinton, and he was the one who managed to broker a deal between the various parties and the two governments. That deal we call the Good Friday Agreement. Again, I believe that Irish Americans played a crucial role in bringing about that peace settlement, which has saved thousands of lives over the past 25 years. Because without that settlement, I believe we would have seen a further spiral of violence in Northern Ireland, and that would have cost the lives of so many people and created so much havoc in Northern Ireland. So America, Irish America, was critical in bringing about that positive outcome to the conflict in Northern Ireland with the Good Friday Agreement signed and ratified in 1998. And then in more recent times, Irish Americans have rallied round to argue that Brexit, by which I mean the United Kingdom's decision to leave the European Union, should not damage the Irish peace process. And they have insisted that the open border on the island of Ireland, which we've had now for 20 years, 20 plus years, that open border needs to be preserved in perpetuity. And in 2020, December 2020, the European Union and the United Kingdom agreed a protocol which provides for an open border on the island of Ireland. But in return for that, the British government agreed to initiate checks on goods entering into Northern Ireland that might find their way into the European single market across the open border on the island of Ireland. That agreement is the subject of continuing discussions because its implementation has proven to be a little more difficult than we had anticipated, and there's still some work to be done. And again there, American assistance, American interest in getting the right outcome to this process of negotiation has been very helpful. And I believe that Irish Americans weighing in to make it clear that they did not want to see any damage done to the Good Friday Agreement, that they did not want to see a border, a hard border being established on the island of Ireland. That has been crucial in helping to bring about a situation where we now have an agreement between the EU and the UK, even though that agreement hasn't been fully implemented. The agreement is there, and I believe Irish Americans played a big part in bringing that agreement about. So where do we stand? We in Ireland are confident about the future. Our country has done very well in recent times, including in dealing with the COVID pandemic, in that our death rate has been, on a per capita basis, has been one of the lowest in the world. Our medical system held up to the strains imposed by COVID. Our people accepted the rigors of the pandemic rules that had to be introduced in order to prevent the virus from spreading too rapidly around the country and overwhelming our medical service. So we've done well in recent years. We've also become a very open and tolerant society. And the best example I can give of that is to remind you that in 2014, the Irish people voted by referendum by 62% to 38% to provide constitutional cover for the introduction of same-sex marriage in Ireland. So our country has changed. It's changed for a number of reasons. Our EU membership has enabled us to blossom as a country. Our people have acquired high levels of education, and this has helped to transform us. And the prosperity that has come with our EU membership and the influx of US investment has helped enormously to change the climate, the economic and social climate in which Irish people live their lives. And that has been reflected in an open, progressive, and tolerant society. And an example of that, of course, is the way in which we've opened our hearts and our country and welcomed Ukrainians fleeing from the crisis in that country. So this year is the centenary of Irish independence. And therefore, it encourages us to look back over the past 100 years. And when I draw a balance sheet, I don't say there's only good things on the one side of the ledger and nothing on the other side. Of course, the ledger is mixed. However, I would point to a number of things that I think are worth noting about our achievement this past 100 years. First of all, we have been a democracy for an unbroken century. And that's no small thing when you consider that our country started its independent life with a civil war, which divided us down the middle and took a year or more to be settled. And yet, despite the ravages of the 20th century, where ideologies of the right and left swept across Europe and established themselves in countries and eclipsed democracy, in Ireland, we never fell to that dreadful temptation of departing from the democratic value system we hold so dear. Secondly, the development of our economy has been, I think, a huge achievement. It's an achievement that came largely in the second half of the first century of Irish independence. And then, of course, our membership of the European Union has really made an enormous difference to our country and given us a totally different outlook on life to the benefit of our people. Looking forward, I believe that events in the world in recent times will serve to bring Europeans and Americans ever closer together. And I know that Ireland and the Irish people will want to be part of that transatlantic journey in which Americans and Europeans, including the people of Ireland and our community around the world, will be significant contributors to the effort on the part of the democracies of our part of the world to assert their values, defend their interests, and seek to create a future world that can be conducive to the kind of societies that we want to live in and that we want our children and grandchildren to live in too. Thank you for your attention, and happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Sorry. Thank you, Ambassador. You've given us so much to think about, the sentimental ties between our two countries, new businesses, one of which, a distillery for whiskey, is just outside my hometown in Livingston, Virginia. The Good Friday Belfast Agreement, changing norms in Ireland. And one of the things that really struck me, and I want to start off here, is something you said about what the war in Ukraine did for our two countries. And one of those is that it gave both of our countries a chance to come together around shared democratic norms. And I wonder, given that sharing of democratic norms, what you thought when you were here at such a strange time, I think, to be an ambassador anywhere, but especially the United States. We had COVID, but we also had a failed insurrection on January 6th. And I'm wondering what you thought about that in the context of your comments about our shared beliefs in democracy.
Well, you know, democracy it's not a final state. It's an ongoing project. And clearly, as circumstances change, value systems change, societies and their democratic systems have to change to meet those external changes that if you ignore them, then that creates even bigger problems. So, for example, in Ireland, I mentioned the Civil War, which started in 1922 and went on for a bit over a year. Now, the two parties that are the political heirs to the two sides in the Irish Civil War are now together in government for the past 2 years for the first time in a century. So having been a century at loggerheads with each other, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, both centre parties, broadly based parties, but they're in government together, which only shows you that things do change and political responses to those changes have to take place. Otherwise, we get out of sync and things start to break down. So the war in Ukraine, I think, has taught us about the values that we share. But I think we also recognize that managing societies as complex as yours and ours in Europe is an ongoing task which doesn't have a finality, doesn't have a final outcome to it. It's a process of managing change. And I hope that Ukraine will have reminded everyone in America and in Europe about what's important and how democracy differs from autocracy, and how respect for the rule of law internationally is a much better outcome than recourse to brutal force. So this won't happen overnight, of course, but I do think that in Europe, we have seen things happening in the last couple of months that might otherwise have taken decades to come about, because we've seen people, our Europeans and their governments, the political parties, have seen in stark terms what really counts. And our societies have been willing to take the pain, because it's no joke for European countries heavily reliant on Russian oil and gas to stand up against Russia, but they've done that. It's no joke for a country like mine to take in 30,000 people from a country that's a long way from Ireland, with which we have relatively limited traditional links. And that, I think, is a sign of how when challenged, our societies will respond, and will respond with positive energy. And that, I hope, will be the case as we move ahead into the rest of this year, next year, and beyond.
Thank you, Ambassador. So I'm going to take a question from the chat and combine it with a question that's burning in my mind. You mentioned Northern Ireland, and we know we're standing on the edge, the eve of elections tomorrow that polls suggest may be historic, in the sense that Sinn Féin seems to be most likely to take the top spot. Would you help us think about how we might anticipate the results of the elections affecting Ireland and affecting the future?
Well, of course, for our government, the priority always is the implementation of the Good Friday Agreement and ensuring that the Good Friday Agreement is preserved and developed, and the potential that's there in the Good Friday Agreement is fully realized in terms of internal political dynamics in Northern Ireland through the executive and the assembly, which is being elected tomorrow, and we'll know the results over the weekend. But also, we want to see Northern Ireland move forward and make progress and develop in a positive way for the future. So we take a genuinely close interest in what happens in Northern Ireland, because it matters to us. Because for the Good Friday Agreement, and I said to you that our priority is to make sure the Good Friday Agreement is fully implemented and that the potential is developed fully in the years ahead, and that Northern Ireland makes progress politically, that North-South relations are enhanced, and that our relations with our nearest neighbor also move forward in a positive way. But in order for that to happen, there has to be a political world in Northern Ireland that functions properly and that enables the other institutions, the North, South, and the East, West, to move forward in the way they're supposed to operate under the terms of the Good Friday Agreement. So clearly, we look with a degree of anxiety at tomorrow's election, because our dearest wish is that at the end of the election, the result will be clear, and then the parties will abide by the result, will give effect to the result under the rules set out as part of the Good Friday Agreement and its outworkings, and that's what we want. Now, of course, there's no guarantee that will happen, because, as you know from media reports, the Democratic Unionist Party withdrew from the executive and has threatened to refuse to nominate a first minister or deputy first minister unless it gets a solution to the issues surrounding the Northern Ireland Protocol. So we're facing into an uncertain and potentially difficult period, and in this context, obviously the support and encouragement from the United States will, as always, be an important element. Usually, when Northern Ireland gets into a stalemate situation, and I'm hoping that won't happen, but it's possible it will, US support and input is often very useful in helping to move things forward. So I can't predict what the outcome will be, but I would say that our government will want to see that outcome, whatever it is, lead to the reestablishment of the executive and the institutions of the Good Friday Agreement, so we can move forward and work together for the betterment of people in Northern Ireland and also on the island of Ireland as a whole. With regard to the protocol, which is a bone of contention, as you know, between the UK and the European Union, that's a matter that has to be resolved between the UK and the EU. It's not an Irish-British affair. We can't negotiate that directly with Britain. But what I would say is that that agreement was made in December, was finalized in December of 2020. So it's only a year and a half old, and it hasn't yet been implemented, which is a problem. But I think the European Union has made every effort to implement that agreement in as light touch a way as possible. In other words, it has pulled back from its original position, was that there had to be fairly sort of rigorous checks on goods coming across the Irish Sea between Britain and Northern Ireland. They've now scaled that back quite considerably and are obviously willing to do a deal and to make a compromise on the implementation of the agreement with the UK. But of course, it requires the two sides to have the same general political will in order for that kind of agreement to be reached. But I think we're obviously hopeful our government will be doing everything it can to encourage agreement on the protocol and agreement on the formation of a new executive, so that the institutions of the Good Friday Agreement can resume their work and deliver for the people of Northern Ireland and the people of Ireland as a whole.
Thank you. I'm going to switch gears here because we have so little time with you, and I just have to ask you this question. You are the only ambassador that I've ever seen who recites poetry on Twitter, and you have a lot of fans for that, including me, and I'm not even a big poetry fan. But it makes me want to ask you, what American poets do you like, or DC-based poets? Are there any Irish poets that you feel speak to the experience of this area of the world, of America, or even the Mid-Atlantic?
Well, I mean, I'm friendly with Terry Cross Davis, who's a local poet who's attached to the Folger Library. She's been here a number of times at our residence reading her poetry on various occasions. I've interviewed Billy Collins, who's a great Irish-American poet. I've interviewed him on a Zoom call for the American Writers Museum in Chicago, which was founded by an Irishman, Malcolm O'Hagan, which I'm very impressed by, and I've been to it a number of times. I also like Mary Oliver. Somebody sent me a copy of her poetry recently. She's a poet from Ohio, I think, and a very fine poet indeed. She's recently deceased, but her poetry is really of a very high caliber in my view. So that would be the kind of American and local poets that I have an interest in and have engaged with their work. In terms of an Irish poet who responds to the moment, of course, I can go no further than Seamus Heaney, who of course died some years ago, but is a favorite poet of President Biden. And President Biden, I'm not the only person in Washington, D.C. who likes poetry, because President Biden is a genuine fan of Irish poetry. He's often said, I don't read Irish poets because I'm Irish, I read them because they're the best. And he particularly loves the work of Seamus Heaney, and he often quotes that great poem about the cure at Troy with the lines that that we want to make hope and history rhyme. I think that's the kind of thing that in every generation, in every year, in every decade, in every country, in every region, that idea of making hope and history rhyme seems to me to be a very powerful one, and it's one that we owe that idea to the fertile poetic imagination of Seamus Heaney.
I hope that you'll do it when you're no longer ambassador. I encourage
I
you.
will. No, I because I'll tell you what, I first did this in 2015 for the 150th anniversary of the birth of William Butler Yeats. And I decided I would mark that year by tweeting some of Yeats's poetry every morning. And I did it for the whole year. And I did multiple tweets on his birthday and on other different times of the year when it was appropriate. At the end of the year, I was going to give it up. And people came to me both personally and also on my Twitter account to say, you must keep this going, Ambassador. And I decided to keep it going. And but I've since switched to doing a range of Irish poets. I do Yeats and Heaney as well sometimes, but I do everything from medieval Irish monks in translation, where these monks wrote their poems in the margins of their manuscripts. I've done everything from that to poets who are in their 20s and 30s. So I've really covered the whole spectrum of Irish poetry, but I particularly like, obviously, Seamus Heaney, but also Evan Boland, who was a lecturer at Stanford for many years and died a couple of years ago. And then some of the younger poets like Eleanor Hooker, who was a very fine poet, Moya Cannon, likewise, Jessica Traynor, and many others. So I have a wide range. Because I'm now associated with poetry on Twitter, a lot of poets send me copies of their poems. So I have a large collection of Irish poetry books upstairs in my study, which I'll continue to dip into in the years ahead after I step down as Ambassador of Ireland at the end of the summer.
Ambassador, I'm going to draw you back to some Seamus Heaney and ask you about the dreary steeples again. And you mentioned protecting the Good Friday Agreement and the focus of the Irish government in protecting the Good Friday Agreement, and that's clearly a priority for the Americans as well. Would you offer us some suggestions as to what you think would be helpful, or how Americans officially and unofficially could support the Good Friday Agreement in the future?
I mean, I think the United States is a country that's no one can ignore what America says, right? So you are a power that's got no rival really in terms of your influence globally. Maybe globally, there's obviously a competition now with with China, but certainly in the transatlantic sphere, the United States has unparalleled significance and influence, and therefore, and I remember myself when I was in Belfast in 1998 and 97, in the run-up to the Good Friday Agreement of Easter 1998. Very often in the evening in Belfast, when things were maybe grinding to a halt. Everyone was tired and wanted to go home late at night. The word would go around that the White House is on the phone. Fancy that. President Clinton in those days. So the most powerful man in the world, with a country to run, a huge country to run, and global responsibilities, would pick up the phone and call these politicians from a small part of the island of Ireland, a small part of the UK, Northern Ireland, and would urge them to go the extra yard, go the extra mile, go the extra whatever, in order to secure an agreement. And that was a vital contribution. So what America can always do is, it's a voice that cannot be ignored. And it's also a voice that has a good connection with both of the parties, or all of the parties, because if you think about it, the United States has a very good relationship with the United Kingdom. It also has a strong relationship with the European Union. It has a strong ties to Ireland. Many Americans have ties to Northern Ireland and to the border counties. So it's an indispensable country in my view, and it's also a country that can really make a difference. So I think there are two things Americans are good at doing. They're good at reminding people in Ireland of the big picture. In other words, there's a sense that Northern Ireland is a narrow ground, and Americans, with their broad perspectives, with their frontier spirit, are very good at reminding people of the big picture. Don't forget where you've come from. You've come from a situation of dire conflict that went on for 30 years to a situation of greater prosperity, peace. Your society is not wrecked by conflict. Remember that, and just make those additional moves that are required to get agreement to move things forward. And the other thing that Americans are good at is reminding people of the economic dimension, because the United States has a major economy and it reaches everywhere in the world. And at the moment, Northern Ireland has a huge advantage, potentially, in that it is the only place in the world that has full access to the European single market and to the UK market. And that should be a huge incentive for Northern Ireland to resolve the issues around the protocol and focus on drawing benefit from this unique set of circumstances that the protocol gives them of access to the European and UK single markets.
I want to ask you a question about being an ambassador from the perspective of many of our students, both in SPA and SIS, School of International Service and School of Public Affairs, who want to go into diplomacy, public diplomacy, working for the State Department. And I think back to the last 5 years you were here, and I can't think of a harder period of time in a sense to be here beyond perhaps the Civil War. And I'm thinking in particular of COVID. So everything shut down. And of course, diplomacy relies on personal face-to-face relationships in many respects. And then also you were ambassador during probably the most disruptive presidency that we've had in the 20th century, or since the 20th century. And in particular, someone who didn't follow the rules, didn't play by protocol, didn't seem to care much about it. So what can you tell future ambassadors or people that want to be an ambassador, what you do in situations where all the things you're supposed to do as an ambassador, you cannot do?
Well, diplomacy requires one quality above all others: flexibility, because we don't design the field on which we play. We don't play on our home pitch. We play on a global pitch that others design, and it's designed in a very difficult and very often contentious and awkward manner. But you have to play the field that you find. You can't say, no, I want the ideal field to play on. So of course, COVID was a major challenge to all diplomats. I was fortunate that I had been here 2.5 years before COVID struck, which meant I had my list of contacts that I could phone, I could have Zoom calls with them, but I didn't see most of them for over a year. So that was a serious challenge for everyone. But then I think about it and say, well, okay, I was challenged, but the whole world was challenged. So in fact, I don't make any kind of special claim that my situation was worse than anybody else's. It wasn't, because I was able to do my work here in Washington, albeit not in the way I would ideally have liked to have done it. I wasn't able to travel for more than a year, but nonetheless, we got, we found ways of coping, and we used technologies like this, I think, very effectively to get our message out. And I was busy. I mean, I spent the year and a half of COVID, I spent that, working full days and working in the evenings. So we managed. In terms of the different administrations, of course, the current administration, from an Irish point of view, is very welcome, because it has at its helm someone who has an Irish heritage and is very proud of it. And you'd be very foolish as a diplomat not to be happy about that, because it's a kind of a gift that is not always available, and it's available to us now. I mean, it doesn't mean that everything goes our way, but it means that we know that at the top of the tree here in the United States, there is somebody in President Biden who does care about Ireland, and who cares about our peace process, and who wants to do the best by us. And that, I think, is a positive thing for a country like ours. Also, of course, the current administration is very keen on good relations with the European Union. And as a European Union member state, that's obviously good for us too. The previous administration was a little less inclined to be satisfied or to be positive about its transatlantic relationship with the European Union. There were a lot of stresses and strains on that relationship, which we had to manage, and we did manage it. And likewise, obviously it was a different type of administration, because most of the people in the administration weren't really that experienced, because they were in government for the first time, and therefore they operated in a different way from maybe the more traditional people that would have been in and out of government over a period of 20, 30 years. They were largely a new crew that came in. So for diplomats, therefore, the job is to find a way of doing a job. So I didn't deal with the president directly. I mean, those days, there were days, by the way, way back in the 50s and the 40s and 50s and earlier, when ambassadors could pop into the White House for a cup of tea and just call on the president, and he would see them, and they would have a chat, and that would be that. But that doesn't happen anymore. You have to, but so diplomats therefore deal with the president only when our prime minister or our senior people are here, and then you get a chance to interact with the president. It doesn't matter whether that's a Democrat president or a Republican president, it doesn't matter. It's all the same. So you have to find people within the administration that you can relate to. And I was able to do that. I was able to build up a group of people within the Trump administration that I was able to deal with. And I'm still in contact with a lot of them, and we're quite friendly and so on. So that's how you do it. You have to you have to find ways. You can't just kind of go in and sulk because you don't like something about your host country. And this applies everywhere in the world, by the way. You have to accept what it is that you're faced with. We don't make the weather. The weather is made by others, and we have to respond to the weather as we find it.
Thank you. I'm aware we're winding down here in terms of time, and I kind of have a bit of a whopper question to ask you at the end, but I'm pulling from a couple different sources. I know you were traveling recently with Simon Coveney, the Minister for Defense and Foreign Affairs, and he made a comment about Ireland not being neutral in this war. Ireland has historically been neutral, and yet has an orientation towards the European Union, which at present is sort of gearing up to defend European values and European territory alongside of the security infrastructure and architecture. So I guess the question is, how does Ireland balance its EU orientation with this increase in the defensive position of the EU? And also, what about debates within Ireland around neutrality in this context?
I'm going to add to that too, because we have a question that's similar in the chat, which is about NATO and whether this calls the question for Ireland to join NATO.
Yeah. Okay. Well, look, what the minister said here last week, and he said it other times as well, and so is our Prime Minister, and so is the other members of our government. So this is kind of established government policy, is that we have a tradition of military neutrality, which means that we have chosen not to join any military alliance. But it doesn't mean we're politically neutral. We never have been. And certainly when it comes to a situation like this, where a country has been invaded by its neighbor and brutal force has been unleashed on that country to effectively conquer it, the view in Ireland of our government, and I think of most of our people, is that you cannot be neutral in that regard. We're not a member of a military alliance, but that doesn't stop us from taking a strong position of opposition to what Russia is doing and pushing back in any way we can, although we're not members of NATO. So, for example, as I said in my remarks, when the European Union decided to provide military aid to Ukraine, the first time the EU has ever done that, by the way, we didn't put up our hand and say, oh no, we can't agree with that because we're militarily neutral. No, we said, that's fine. We will contribute our share. Our share should go towards non-lethal equipment, which of course, every package of military aid will have some lethal aid and some non-lethal equipment, and we did that. So that works. We have certainly been out there very strongly pushing back against Russia, and I don't think anybody could accuse Ireland of being weak-kneed when it comes to the situation in Ukraine. We have been full on. The only thing we haven't done is we haven't supplied military weaponry because we don't really have that sort of quantity of weaponry that would be of value to Ukraine anyway. But we certainly supplied humanitarian aid, and we've supplied non-lethal. We've supplied ambulances and all sorts of stuff that Ukrainians also need in order to continue their struggle to defend their country against Russian aggression. Within the European Union, I think our position is understood, and there's a value we believe in not being a member of a military alliance. We feel that we may have some capacity to play a particular role because we're not part of NATO. We're not bound by what NATO decides, and that's why we decided that we wanted to be members of the UN Security Council, and we managed to get elected to that council back in 2020, and we've been on the council since last year, and we've been very, very strong in the positions we've taken in condemnation of Russia at the Security Council. And then, of course, as the minister has acknowledged, there is a debate in Ireland about whether our military neutrality in its present form is fit for purpose in this environment. The minister said last week that he doesn't believe that we're likely to join NATO anytime soon, but he has certainly acknowledged that our security environment has certainly changed because of what we've seen happening in Ukraine and what we've seen of the aggressive stance that Russia has taken, including at one stage threatening to have naval exercises not very far from Ireland's coast in our exclusive economic zone. So our minister also predicted last week in a media interview that our defense expenditure may have to increase by 50% in the coming years, and that would be a major change, a major shift in Ireland's posture from the point of view of its security. So I think we're going to be taking defense and security more seriously from now on, putting a lot more resources into it, looking at our options for the future. I don't see us joining NATO anytime soon, but certainly a debate has started about what we need to be able to do and what we may have to do in order to defend the interests that we have, the interests we have as a European Union member state in this increasingly troubled world we now live in.
That's excellent. Thank you. I know we stretched you to speak about a whole variety of topics here. We wanted to thank you very much for taking out the time and for lending us your expertise.
You're very welcome.
Your vision. And we'd like to thank all of the participants and attendees for making this evening so special. And our sponsors include the Sign Institute, the School of Public Affairs, the School of International Service, and the Transatlantic Policy Center. We're also delighted to have with us the student group Ask an Ambassador, which is headed by Ria Dutta, who did the initial introduction. So thank you to all of our co-sponsors. Thank you especially to the ambassador for making it such a fantastic evening. And we hope to see those of you in town at our in-person reception over in the Founders Room in SIS starting at 7. Thank
Okay,
you.
I'll see you there. And thanks to all of you, and thanks especially to Ria and her people, her fellow students in the Media Ambassador group. I'm sorry I wasn't able to meet you in person, Ria, but I look forward. I hope that our virtual meeting has been of value to the students in your group. And thank you all very much for your attendance and for your attention.